Hello guys and welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be reading Captain Underpants and the Invasion of the Incredibly Naughty Cafeteria Ladies from Outer Space and the Subsequent Assault of the Equally Evil Lunchroom Zombie Nerds. So let's get started. Hello, it's us again. Before you read this book, there's some things you should know. So Harold and I have created this informative pamphlet to fill you in on the details. Please don't let this comic fall into the wrong hands. George Beard and Harold Hutchins present a Denny Everything production. Captain Wedgie Ward's Underpants. Episode 1. The Phantom Principal. A long time ago in an elementary school far away, there were two cool kids named George and Harold. We rule! Me too! They had an evil principal named Mr. Krupp, who was strong in the ways of the Force. Blah blah. He forced them to study. Blah blah blah. He forced them to clean. Blah blah blah. And he forced them to behave. Ha ha ha. So George and Harold hypnotized him. You'll obey our every command. Okay. You are now Captain Underpants. Ha ha ha. Okay. It started out as a joke, but it wasn't funny for long. Ha ha ha. Tra la 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 la. Hey, come back! Mr. Krupp thought he really was the world's greatest superhero. He got into all kinds of trouble. George and Harold had to save him and the entire planet. Twice. Now the only way they can turn Captain Underpants back into Mr. Krupp is to pour water over his head. But the worst part is that George and Harold have to keep an eye on Mr. Krupp. Blah blah blah. Because for some strange reason, whenever he hears somebody snap their fingers, he turns back into you-know-who. Tra-la-la-la-la-la. So whatever you do, please don't snap your fingers around Mr. Krupp. You heard the man. Please, please, please don't snap those fingers. This has been a public service announcement from George and Harold, who still deny everything. Treehouse Comics, Inc. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. If you were looking for a few words to describe George and Harold, you might come up with the kind, funny, smart, determined, and deep. Just ask their principal, Mr. Krupp. He'll tell you that and George and Harold are kind of funny looking, smart Alex who are determined to drive everybody off the deep end. But don't listen to him. George and Harold are actually very clever and good-hearted boys. Their only problem is that they're fourth graders, and at George and Harold's school, fourth graders are expected to sit still and pay attention for 7 hours a day. George and Harold are just not very good at that. The only thing George and Harold are good at is being silly. Unfortunately, George and Harold's silliness gets them into trouble every now and on. And then, sometimes it gets them into a lot of trouble. And one time it got them into so much trouble. It almost caused the entire Earth to be destroyed by an army of giant evil zombie nerds. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. The Evil Space Guys. One darkly night in Piqua, Ohio, a flaming object was seen streaking across the quiet mid-sky. It shone brightly for a second or two, then fizzled out just above Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. Nobody gave it a second thought. The next day, everything seemed pretty normal. Nobody noticed anything different about the school. Nobody paid any attention to the roof, and of course, nobody looked up and said, "Hey, what's that big special thingy doing on the roof of the school?" Perhaps if they had, the horrible ordeal that followed might never have happened, and you wouldn't be sitting here reading about it right now. But they didn't. It did. And well, here we are. As we can plainly see, there was a spaceship on top of the building. And inside that spaceship were three of the most evil, hideous, and merciless spacemen ever to set foot on a roof of a small Midwestern elementary school. Their names were Zorks, Clax, and Jennifer. Their mission to take over planet Earth. "First," said Zorks, "we must find a way to infiltrate the school." "Then," said Clax, "we will turn all the children into giant evil, superpowered evil zombie birds." "Finally," said Jennifer, "we will use them to take over the world." Zorks and Clax laughed and laughed. "Silence, you fools," barked Jennifer. "If our plan is to work, we must wait until it's narrowly convenient. In the meantime, we will watch their every move on a trinoscope." Chapter 3, Fun with Science. Early that same morning, George and Hal were sitting in their 10:15 a.m. science class making silly noises. "Meow," George mewed softly without moving his lips. "Roar," growled Harold without opening his mouth. "There it is again," exclaimed their science teacher, Mr. Fye. "I distinctly heard a cat and a dog in here." "We didn't hear anything," the children said, trying not to laugh. Who would do that? I must be hearing things again," Mr. Fye worried. "Maybe you should leave and go see a doctor," said George with concern. "I can't," said Mr. Fye. "Today is the day of the big volcano experiment." The children all groaned. Mr. Fye's science experiments were usually the most idiotic things on earth. They almost never worked and were always boring. But today's experiment was different. Mr. Fye brought in a large fake-looking volcano that he made out of papaya mache. He filled the volcano with a box of ordinary baking soda. Baking soda is also called sodium bicarbonate, explained Mr. Fye. "Meow," said Mr. Fye. "Did any of you children hear, never mind." Mr. Fye opened up a bottle of clear liquid. "Now watch what happens when I pour vinegar into the baking soda," he said. "Meow." The children watched as the tiny volcano started to rumble. Soon a large glob of foamy goop spurted out the top. The goop poured over the desk and dripped onto the floor, creating a huge mess. "Oops," said Mr. Fye. "I guess I used too much baking soda." George and Hal were stunned. "How did you do that?" asked Harold. "Well," said Mr. Fye, "the vinegar acts as a liberating agent, which releases the gaseous carbonate, radical element of the sodium bio." Meow. Mr. Fye paused. Excuse me, children. I've got to go and see a doctor." Mr. Fye put on his coat and hurried out the door. George and Hal got up and studied the messy volcano experiment with great interest. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" asked George. I think I'm thinking what you're thinking, said Harold. Chapter 4, The Setup. After school, the two boys raced to George's house and got down to business. George and Harold sat down and began creating a bogus cupcake recipe. We'll just add a box of baking soda and a bottle of vinegar to this recipe, said George, and whoever makes these cupcakes will get a big surprise. Let's add 2 boxes of baking soda and 2 bottles of vinegar to this recipe, said Harold. That way they'll get an even bigger surprise. Good idea, laughed George. Chapter 5, Mr. Krupp's Crispy Cupcakes. The next morning at school, George and Harold strolled into the cafeteria and tapped a festive-looking card to the kitchen door. Soon the lunch ladies arrived. Oh, look, said Miss Creans, the head lunch lady. Today is Mr. Krupp's birthday, and he'd like us to make a batch of cupcakes just for him. Isn't that cute? I've got an idea, said the cook, Miss D. Point. Why don't we surprise him and make cupcakes for the whole school? Good thinking, said Miss Creans. Let's see how this recipe. Let's see now. This recipe serves 10, and we have about 1,000 students and faculty in this school. So we need 100 eggs, 150 cups of flour, 200 boxes of baking soda, 7 quarts of green food coloring, 50 sticks of butter, 150 cups of sugar, and let's see. Oh yes, 200 bottles of vinegar. Mr. Krupp's Crispy Cupcakes. Ingredients: 1 egg, 1/2 cups of flour, 2 boxes baking soda, 1.5 cups sugar, 200 stick butter, green food coloring, bottles of vinegar. Directions: mix flour and sugar with baking soda and egg. Melt butter and pour into mixture. Stir in food coloring. Now add vinegar. Mix well. Pour into cupcake thingies. Bake all at 45 degrees for 3 hours. The lunch ladies scurried about, gathering everything they needed. They dumped the eggs, food coloring, milk, and baking soda into a large vat and began to mix thoroughly. Then somebody poured in the vinegar. Now I know some of you might have read Chapter 6, so I'll give you a sneak peek. Chapter 6. What happened next? Note, please check this book back and forth uncontrollably when you read the following word. Also shout it out as loud as you can. Don't worry, you won't get in trouble. Kablosh. So that is a sneak peek on Chapter 6. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and also if you turn on the bell notifications, it might be helpful because you'll get a notification on when the new episode 2, when the next chapters arrive. So see ya. Bye bye.